This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Ulster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today, we have a very fun interview with the co-EP of Star Trek Prodigy, Aaron Waltke, and we talk about all kinds of fun stuff, including just some of his Star Trek likes and dislikes and thoughts, as well as Prodigy-specific things. So let's do a little bit of news first. We actually did talk to Aaron quite a bit about the strike and his experience with a whole bunch of other Star Trek people who all got together on the picket lines. But first, let's just talk about sort of the strike in general and where it is.
Yeah, we're at week 3, I guess. Apparently, there's just no movement going on. So it's going to go on for a while.
Yeah, I talked to a friend who's in the guild this week, just chatting, and she's said just from the chatter she's hearing and what she's being told, she's guessing like we're talking July, maybe August, things getting back up and running by then.
And it could get worse because the Screen Actors Guild, the board has voted unanimously to give the union the authority to call for a strike. But the members actually have to approve this. But even if they vote yes, that doesn't mean they're going to go on strike. It just gives the union the authority to call a strike if negotiations, which haven't even started yet, break down by the end of June. So we're about 5 weeks away from, kind of the Armageddon scenario. I mean, it could be the actors joining the writers.
And certainly many of them have been out on the picket lines just supporting the writers anyway, which is why everybody was voting yes, and to give the authorization.
So that's where the strike is. Last Friday, the WGA East and West called for a Star Trek themed picket line day, and we put an article with pictures from that day on both sides. The biggest one obviously was going to be at Paramount, where ironically no Star Trek is actually shot anymore. But symbolically, Paramount in Hollywood is a big deal.
Yep.
And there were people from, because David Gerald was there. So
every single Star Trek show was represented, from original series, and he was animated series too, so that counts, all the way through to the current shows, and every single show had somebody there.
And actors too. Bakula was there, and Jerry Ryan was there, and just a ton of actors. And
Denise Crosby was there. Mary Chieffo was there. It was Ethan Peck was there. It was crazy. John Billingsley
in New York. Tawny Newsome was there.
Yep, Celia Rose Gooding. I think Jess Bush showed up there, and Melissa Navia was there.
Anthony Rapp, he lives in New York, is doing a show in New York.
He was there with his baby.
So that's where that is. We'll talk more with Aaron about that, but if you want to see the fun pictures, check it out. But there was a video from our friend Larry Nemechek.
Yeah.
Which kind of had some, not news, but confirming things that we've known, but, are now more set.
First of all, it's worth watching in itself just to see, because he does talk to a whole bunch of the different people who are there, who are gathering to take a big photo together as well. But Strange New Worlds, no surprise, season 3 has ceased production, obviously.
Well, they never even started production.
Yeah, so they're not moving forward at all right now.
So Henry Alonzo Myers is the co-showrunner. He was in the line, and he said something like, not until after the strike.
Right. Which we knew.
Yeah.
We hadn't heard it from his mouth yet, but we knew it. And the Starfleet Academy show too, obviously they're not doing anything else there. One of the writer's assistants was there in a cool Star Trek t-shirt. And he said something about how they had a very long runway, which I assume means they had started quite some time ago, but they're not doing anything now at all.
Well, and they also, they have a long runway between now and when they were planning on starting production, which is early next year. But he said something effective, now they're assuming the writer's room will live on into next year.
Right.
Which could delay production on season 1. So Paramount Plus may not have as much live action Star Trek as early as they might want.
If they don't have shows, they can't put them on the air. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and the last thing they've got in the can is Discovery Season 5. So when they air that in early 2025, 4, they will have the 2 animated shows, and that's maybe all we get next year. In fact, I'm betting now that's all we get next year.
We'll see. That would be sad. We'll need
Yeah.
to book a lot of interviews. Of course, I only think about how this affects the two of us. So
that's still, I mean, that would still add up to 30 episodes of Star Trek. So it's not,
All right. Speaking of Strange New Worlds, which we finally got that trailer that we've been waiting for, and a poster, and a cool shot of Mariner and Boimler. So let's start with that trailer, which I have to say, I often think, oh, the trailers don't show us great and they make it look like action, action, action. I mean, in everything across the board. This trailer, I thought was great. And I'm nervous about this show.
Yeah. I mean, the best part about it, I think, is that it shows you lots of just alien locations.
Yes.
Which is the whole point of the show. And space locations and all that kind of stuff. You get a sense that they're going to, do some strange new worlds.
That's the thing for me is I felt the adventure. The sense of adventure was to me the strongest thing in this trailer that got me excited. We're going to go to places we haven't seen. We're going to see the ship doing crazy stuff, and we're going to meet some aliens.
We're going to go to some familiar places. We saw more of Rigel 7, which is kind of the ultimate familiar place in Star Trek because it was the first place.
Right.
Cage. And there's a brief shot of a Gorn in a spacesuit, I think.
I think I blocked that. I just refuse to accept it. There'll be a whole Gorn episode and I'll be like, nope, not the Gorn. I'm not watching this.
Captain Girlfriend is back. Captain Batel.
I know. I still don't think she's quite girlfriend. I just think she's friend with benefits. But we'll see.
Yeah, we saw some of those benefits. Kissing.
Yes,
There's a lot of kissing in this trailer.
There was a lot of kissing. I have to say, I'm less interested in the kissing. I like a good romance, but all that kissing just in the trailer makes me think, oi, how much kissing is in the actual thing? And why is everybody kissing?
So it's Pike and Batel, and then Spock and Chapel is kind of the big kissing.
And Lon and Kirk.
There's a lot of kissing, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's a couple of minutes trailer and there's already a lot of kissing. And why are Spock and Chapel kissing? But hopefully there's some crazy sci-fi reason that they're kissing.
Yeah, I mean, they're infected by aliens or,
sure.
There's going to be something. I very much liked it. We got a bit of a sense of the Carol Kane character.
Yes. I'm so excited for that.
I guess, Frazzy, wacky. She's going to be a funny character, I think is where we're going with that.
Yeah, well, she's a terrific actress, but she's definitely extra brilliant when it comes to comedy. Plus, I have to say, I just love that they have a 70-year-old actress as the chief engineer.
Yeah.
Here's something else I thought about. I mean, again, it's just a trailer, so it's hard to tell, but I feel like there was very little M'Benga in there. He didn't get much to do, and I felt that way. He had a few stories that were about him, but normally in Star Trek, our Doctor's so integrated into everything that's happening, and I hope that they do include him in more scenes with more people.
I think the teaser that they released, I guess, was at the end of March, had a lot of a M'Benga in it, actually, when you look back at it. And M'Benga in different situations with different people. So I think that's just how they cut this thing.
I hope so. I have to take a look. I don't really remember, it's been a while. But I thought that even the opening scene with Ortegas flying and then saying, oh, I did this all the time. And that whole scene I thought was a great setup too. It's just really well done and surprisingly so.
Fan reaction so far has been very positive because this is very different than Picard. So people are starting to make the transition now to different kind of Star Trek.
I think people are also super excited about Mariner and Boimler from Lower Decks, and they look great. I noticed on the bridge, her sleeves are rolled up, but I don't think they are in the transporter room.
Boimler's hair, a lot of people thought that his hair wasn't purple. I think if you're watching it on your phone, you might not notice it. You need to watch it on a good screen, but the purple hair is there. It's just...
It's not vibrant.
But it's purple. There's definitely...
They look great. Just the little bits we've seen of what they've said looks good. That is going to be so much fun.
Yeah, and you could get a sense, which we've heard of this whole issue with Boimler and Spock, about how Boimler just kind of loses it around Spock, and you get a sense of that in the trailer at the end.
And Tawny posted something on Twitter about like some alternate line that he did that was funny and how funny it was doing that scene. There's something on the poster too. If you look at the poster, it's got all these colors in it and we see the cast, but then for some reason there's like almost a black and white sort of strip of the poster, and that's where Chapel is.
Yes, some people have said maybe there's a message there, but we know Chapel lives, and I just think that it's a multicolored poster, and one of those colors was gray. And so she's in the gray part, but I'm not sure there's a message there.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like an odd choice, gray in the middle of all those colors. I don't know. I feel like that's there maybe for a reason.
Kirk is not in the poster. Pella is not in the poster.
Because they're not main cast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So there's some other Strange New Worlds news coming from SFX Magazine. There was an interview with Akiva Goldsmith.
Some things he confirmed that we knew the Gorn were coming back. We're going to see Captain Angel again, which I'm pretty sure we knew. The one thing he said about the crossover that I thought was interesting was that he said it would have full-on animated pieces as well. I knew that it was them coming into live action, and I didn't know that there were going to be fully animated.
Well, didn't Frakes say that when he was here? I think he said, I think it's bookended animated. So I think it's, there's going to be like a minute at the end and a minute at the beginning. I don't think it's going to.
Yeah, what Frakes described sounded to me like a lot less than what Akiva said.
I'm betting it's just the bookends. It's interesting how he says it, is that they kind of, when they were putting this together, they realized they needed to bring in the people from lower decks to really help them craft it and get the tone right. Mike McMahon being very important there.
Which is good. I was happy to hear that. I mean, that's the episode I'm the most excited about in this season. That's the one thing I'm most excited about the whole season. And he also, Akiva said that he's very open to all kinds of other crossovers. I think once the floodgates are opened, he's going to start thinking about how they can do that with other shows.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. Or maybe, going the other way.
There's always a way to do it.
He talked about how Kirk is a Lieutenant Kirk and is different. So I'm still going to be open-minded on the Kirk thing until we actually see it.
Well, that makes one of us. I mean, I'm not fully closed-minded, but I'm already very much leaning on why are they doing that. So I'm glad you'll be open-minded, and as I always say, I hope to be pleasantly surprised.
So what did you think of what he had to say about canon and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, it is... So he said, we'll body check canon when we need to, and we have. Yes, they most certainly have. And he talked about moving people around in terms of timelines and putting people together who weren't necessarily together. And the thing that got me was when he said, trying to stay within canon is an awfully fun exercise and leads to solutions that you might not come up with if you didn't have those boundaries. Frankly, I don't think they have those boundaries. I think they've just gotten rid of the boundaries and they're doing what they want.
It all comes down to the execution, because I'm not a canonista, but I don't want you to disrespect it either. And so, yeah, I'm a little nervous about season 2. He talked also about season 2 is going to be season 1, but more, and so different genres. And he said, basically, we're trying to bend. He used the phrase bend Star Trek before we break it. And so they're kind of trying to push the limits, and, risk is our business. So I don't want to prejudge. So this will all come down to execution. We may look back and say, yeah, they took a risk and that was cool. Or we may look back and say they're being a bit cavalier with the franchise.
I'm fine with playing with different genres. Like, I think Star Trek's always done that. And it's one of the fun aspects of it. So that to me, and I don't get super hung up on lots of details. I don't, if they get a ship name somewhere in there that's I don't care about that stuff. But what I do care about is things that are sort of essential to who our characters are as we've known them, and messing with that kind of stuff. And as you said, if it's very well executed, I can forgive a lot, because if I'm enjoying myself, I'm enjoying myself. It's usually when I'm not enjoying it that those things bother me more.
We're, just a few weeks away, so I remain excited. Let's move on. Oh, just minor Strange New Worlds news. Well, not minor. If you're a comic book fan, they've announced a new comic book miniseries coming out the week after the series finale. This is IDW. It's going to be called The Scorpius Run. So when Strange New Worlds wraps up, you'll have this as a little bonus to keep you going. We don't know if it's set after season 2, but that's cool. So
Yeah.
more IDW comics. I've been hyping them for a while. They just got nominated for their first Eisner Awards for Star Trek, so they're doing great work. And you should be checking out the Star Trek comics because there's a whole bunch of them, and people should be buying them so that they keep on doing it.
Yeah. We also have a little bit of Star Trek Picard news, which is that for the third time, the show has cracked the Nielsen top 10. So it was the penultimate episode and the series finale, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of delay with Nielsen streaming rankings, so they take weeks. But yeah, the last two, and so episode 9 that week they came in 10th, and then for the finale they came in 9th with kind of a big jump. It's a big deal. Paramount Plus, they just started tracking this year. So that the season finale of the Harrison Ford show was ranked like 5th or 4th or something. So that did even better. But you had the new show with which I liked, Rabbit Hole with Kiefer Sutherland. That never showed up. You got the Pink Ladies show, all sorts of other shows, good shows on Paramount Plus that aren't showing up on this chart. So it makes sense that Star Trek and Yellowstone shows are going to show up in the chart because those are the two biggest franchises they've got.
Right. And in any promotional material that Paramount Plus is sending out about anything, those shows are always mentioned. You see their logos, you see their images, everything. It's a big deal.
Yeah, the big question is Strange New Worlds going to be showing up, and is it going to be outperforming Picard or not making it to the top 10?
The legacy petition is still going strong and is now up to over 57,000 people have signed that.
Yeah, which is, it's going to at least double, I predict, the Strange New Worlds petition before that show even had a name. But people shouldn't think, Strange New Worlds got a petition that, and then they got a show, so therefore this is going to get a show.
Yeah, petitions don't get shows made. So
even if the WJ strike was not happening, it doesn't hurt. Fans should be out there supporting the show, getting the message out, using the hashtag. But those Nielsen rankings are probably more important than a million hashtags.
All right.
There's something else cool on the site right now. Your interview with Cirroc Lofton and Denise Crosby talking about podcasting. They're not really rewatching, are they? Next Generation.
Well, so what they're doing is, they were great to talk to, by the way, and gave me so much more time than they'd even promised me. They were amazing. So they're watching Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1, making their way through each episode, but it's all Denise's episodes, and then once she's gone, I don't think, she said she's not going to keep going through the whole series with Cirroc, but she will come back whenever she's in an episode. So, and the fun thing about these two is, he's never watched The Next Generation. Like he said he knows who the characters are, but that's pretty much it. And she hasn't watched since her episodes aired the first time, and then she didn't keep watching. So it's very funny to talk to two people who are in Star Trek, and I'm telling them, like, hang in there, it's going to get better. They don't know how great TNG is going to be because they're in that first season where they really are still kind of finding their tone and their voice, and each person is finding the characters.
I remember when I talked to Denise last year, she kind of implied that if Michael Piller, who everyone kind of considers saved the show later on, was the showrunner, she might not have left.
Yeah, she brought him up in our interview as well, when we were talking about sexism and how it got so much better with Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And she said, that's Michael. She was like, that's what happens. It's who's writing it, Michael Piller. And when I said I thought it went kind of backwards again on Enterprise, I mean, there was no Michael Piller there. So
Yeah.
very interesting stuff. And then I'd ask them, when they watch new Star Trek, which I know they're watching, at least Picard and stuff like that, did they see roles for themselves or how they could be brought back? Because anybody could. Sirach, I thought it was funny, brought up season 1, that reporter that's interviewing Picard. He's like, that should have been Jake.
That would have been cool.
Yeah.
If Terry Metalis was running that season, there's almost no doubt it would have been. Right?
Yeah, and he said he would have brought up Wolf 359. So, that was a very interesting thought. And then Denise, of course, was like, well, she had tweeted, I think, even because she was grateful, I guess, that she got a little moment in Picard, when Data's holding the hologram thing. So, and she was thanking Terry for including her. And he said, we'd never forget Tasha. And then he says, Sela next.
Yeah.
And she had this whole theory that like Tasha escaped and that eventually she and Sela could meet up and they'd be the same age.
Interesting thought. So if there's a possible storyline for Star Trek Legacy, if that ever happens.
Yeah, like I said, would it be in the Legacy show? And she said, it could be that. It could be a new show or part of some other. She didn't think it should be its own show. But she did think it could be part of some Terry Mattel. They all just love Terry so much. And I mean, who can blame them?
Exactly. There's a lot more great stuff in your interview, so people should just check out the whole thing.
Yeah. So there's this game, Star Trek Resurgence, which I did not have the laptop necessary to play this game, which made me sad because you guys have all been raving about how much fun it is.
So Star Trek Resurgence came out this week. It's available on PC, Xbox, PlayStation. It's a narrative adventure game. So it's kind of like, it really adds up to more than a season. You could end up playing this thing for 15, 20 hours. It's a single story, diplomatic crisis. You play 2 different characters and there's a mystery with some deep cuts to Star Trek. I think we've already said this before. I mentioned it in a previous week, but I'm not going to spoil it in case I haven't mentioned it.
So we have a Slack channel and all the gamers are going, yeah, Lori would really love this. And I'm like, oh. So it's, I have simple needs for my laptop, so it's just not up to the task.
You don't really need to be a gamer to enjoy the game. And in fact, if you're a hardcore gamer, because like some gamers are like, well, it's not 60 frames per second. It doesn't have the graphics that you'll get. It's not that kind of game. It's not a sandbox game. It's not a shooter. It's a story game. It's an interactive story. There's some puzzles. The puzzles are frustrating at times. And it's all in my review, but Brian and I agree, and Joe, that it's a really, really good Star Trek story. Some great performances. The guy who plays Spock is really good. Jonathan Frakes is in there playing Riker. But it's mostly these new characters, and each of whom have their own personalities, and you help guide those personalities through the game. So highly recommended, Star Trek Resurgence.
And Lori would like it. Yeah.
And Lori, yeah, exactly. Let's roll in our interview with Aaron Waltke.
All right, we are here with Aaron Waltke, who is the co-EP on Star Trek Prodigy, which I love to rave about how much I love. And we're going to talk to him about a whole lot of different things, Star Trek and Writers Guild and Prodigy. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
You were here for our 100th, but I don't think we wanted to wait till our 200th to have you back.
Yes, I still dream about that. the honor.
So you just had an interesting experience. You were walking the picket line for Star Trek Theme Day at Paramount Pictures. What was that like?
Yes. So, obviously, Star Trek Prodigy is in the Animation Guild, so it is a different guild, but TAG, it definitely encourages union solidarity. And the Star Trek powers that be, wanted to show their alliance with the Writers Guild because, their struggle is everyone's struggle, and trying to keep wages fair and equitable and living doing this possible here in Hollywood. So, the Prodigy team came out to show their support. And it was really interesting. Obviously nobody wants to be on strike. No one wants to go on strike. And I think not speaking out of turn that everyone would prefer this strike be ended as quickly as possible. But, I think there is something very encouraging, I should say, about seeing the level of solidarity and union in the in this union, of everyone kind of coming together and saying this is a cause worth fighting for. And it was really inspiring, seeing people from literally every other Star Trek show there, many of whom I had already knew, some of whom I had known through like Twitter, but never had a chance to see in meet space, as they say. And everybody from like David Gerald to Ethan Peck to Jason Mantzoukas to Rebecca Romaine, and like everybody was there, it felt like. And yeah, it was the only other time I felt that kind of like pride, and that's, I guess, that sort of existential swell of, wow, I'm really a part of something much bigger than myself, was I remember the first time they did Star Trek Day, and going to like the blue carpet, I guess they had, and just seeing down the line them interviewing like George Takei and then the Stranger Worlds people. Then it's like, wow, there's just 60 years of incredible creativity and thought and philosophy. And, it felt like being part of a Star Trek convention, but there with a very specific purpose other than to sign autographs and answer fan questions. For me personally, it was my grandfather was a union guy, and he was part of the tool and die model maker, the machinists union, actually. He was sort of an engineer and an inventor, sort of a Scotty of his time, I guess. Did stuff for the space shuttle and worked with B.F. Skinner's people in the psychology world, and he was just a really interesting dude. But anyway, so I definitely come from a union family, so I was happy to show my support. And I do remember there, or probably the most memorable thing I should say that happened there was, I went to write my sign, and of course, like there's one quote that's the best for a Star Trek picket, which is of course Chief O'Brien saying he was more than a hero, he was a union man. So I just wrote that down on a sign, and then turned around, and then there was Robert Hewitt Wolf, who had co-written that episode with Ira Bear, who was also there. And he was holding a better sign than mine with the same quote. And so we had kind of a laugh about it. And, we were Twitter friends, but that was the first time that we had met in person. So it's a surreal moment for sure.
That's amazing. I also come from union stock, by the way, big organizers, and my great grandparents. But so who else was there that really that you hadn't encountered yet?
I had not met Jerry O'Connell or Rebecca Romaine, and curiously, Jason Mantzoukas, even though we've been working with him as the voice of Jankum Pog for several years now, because of the pandemic, we always had him recording remotely. So we had talked over Zoom and stuff with the team, but never had met in person. And, our cast on Prodigy is international. So a lot of our crew, or a lot of our cast even, is in like Europe and England and such. So it's always kind of special to be able to, hang out with them in person. Yeah, so it was really amazing, actually. And Bill Wolkoff is a friend of mine. We actually go way back to working at DreamWorks together. He used to run. He was a co-creator of a show called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts while I was there working on Guillermo del Toro's Netflix show, Troll Hunters. And so it was great kind of catching up with him a little bit. And Carlos Cisco, who helped organize it, is also great. I don't know if you've talked with him at all. He was a Discovery writer, and also very active in the RPG community. And I believe he actually even wrote the official Discovery RPG companion for Star Trek Adventures. And he's great.
Wow. Very nerdy.
Yes. I'm geeking out about it, just talking about it.
Yeah.
That's actually, they are now releasing, this is going down a rabbit hole. They're just about to release the Lower Decks companion Have you heard anything about a Prodigy companion to that game, and would you be the one to write it?
I would love to. That's very far above my pay grade as far as like if and how and when that stuff happens. But maybe if there's enough fan interest, it certainly could happen.
There are people who are members of TAG and WGA. Let me ask you, I mean, this is a super technical thing, but even though the WGA is on strike, if you're on a TAG show and you're a member of the WGA, you're still allowed to work on the under the TAG contract for the animated shows.
Well, not only allowed to, but encouraged, because the nature of union negotiation, like TAG is part of IATSE, which negotiated with the AMPTP last year. And so once you agree to a contract with the AMPTP, you should honor it. Otherwise, striking and negotiations don't mean anything. So that's basically the for people who are in TAG and the WGA, you are encouraged to complete your TAG contract, because it is a legal contract with the AMPTP that and I can't speak to all the specific strike rules, but it's this kind of the same reason why SAG can't go on strike yet, because they are still technically under their previous contract. Same with the DGA.
Do you think that these unions, the two you just mentioned, are likely to join? I mean, I think SAG is leaning in that direction for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to that one way or the other, but what I will say that this year it does feel like everyone is very much on the same page. That there has been sort of an existential shift in how television is being made, and I think everybody just seems to agree that we need to kind of create a new set of rules that will make this a sustainable practice in the industry.
I mean, if either SAG or DGA join, that just shuts down everything. Period. Right?
Yeah, I mean, if the SAG goes on strike, they can't perform, and if DGA goes on strike, they can't direct, and there's not much else you can really do at that point, other than edit existing footage into oblivion, I guess.
This is I don't know if you can get into this, but for Prodigy season 2, do you have the voice work already done in the can, at least for the first 10 episodes?
Yeah. So Prodigy, we finished writing the season 2 last year, and so we've been producing and recording those episodes, and so we're currently fairly well along with that. Well into animation. We have the first several episodes completely locked and done, and I think we're at the point where we have most everything recorded, which was always, that's just how schedules work. So as far as I know, we'll continue unimpeded. Occasionally there are pickups that you need here or there or what have you, and those obviously would have to wait if the SAG goes on strike.
We were talking about this last week because on Lower Decks, there's a lot of improv going on with those actors because of the nature of the show and the actors that they hired. With Prodigy, it's obviously a different story, but is there anyone in there who does improv and changes things and does some improv in the booth that affects the show?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always bits of improv, and sometimes, for instance, Jason Mantzoukas kind of added his own little flair to how Jankum Pog performs. There's a number of times where, he'll start a take by going, like this sort of like guttural eruption that is quite amazing. Other actors like Kate is really an amazing performer, and she can find a lot of different nuances if you give her the room to play of how something is performed and done. Brett Gray actually is also very versatile, and he can, like, if you tell him to make it funnier, he'll make it 10 times funnier with how he delivers it and adds pauses and goes and stuff like that. Or if you want him to play it serious, he can pull that. Like, he's a very versatile voice actor, and I could be wrong, but I think this might be his first voice acting job, which is incredible to me because he's so good at it. He was a live action actor when we hired him, primarily at least. But yes, improvisation, you definitely get a little bit of that here or there. And as season 2 comes out, I definitely will try to point that out, of where there is little bits of improv here and there that have come out.
And I know you can't tell us any big secrets about season 2, obviously.
Yes.
But yeah, we accept that. But can you, like, what would you say is the biggest difference between season 1 and season 2?
Well, I mean, I think you can kind of suss that out from just season 1, which is obviously season 1 ends with a very distinct sort of turning of a page into a new chapter. The protostar, spoiler alert, by the way, for anybody who hasn't finished season 1, like pause here and go watch season 1. So season 1 ends, obviously the protostar has been destroyed. The Prodigy crew have made it back to Earth, and even though they didn't make it into Starfleet Academy, they've been given a sort of provisional sort of training status to become non-coms, or warrant officers in training who don't necessarily have rank but can still serve on a ship. And the history of non-commissioned officer, or ranks, I should say, in Starfleet is very nebulous and strange and kind of wide open. I think there's only been like 4 ever explicitly mentioned, where they actually talk about being non-coms. O'Brien,
even though there should be,
right,
there should be tons of them out there.
Yeah, and even Gene Roddenberry himself kind of famously went back and forth over whether they existed, even though there definitely were crewmen in TOS. Like, he's written books about how, no, everybody on the Enterprise was actually an officer, because the way he envisioned it was sort of like this idealized, what would the better parts of the military or the Navy look like 100, 200, 300 years from now? And he's like, oh, they don't even adhere to a hierarchy in the traditional sense. They just salute because it's respectful and it's like a hello. And it's just like, whoa, okay. But then, he's gone back and forth saying that, like, in his mind, they're like astronauts, right? And every astronaut has to be an officer, like they're both, they've passed all of the critical tests and are educated gentlemen or gentlewomen or people, that are up in space that are doing this just out of the kindness of their hearts, which a very interesting take, in my opinion. But I think sometimes when you talk to a slowly 21st century folk, it's hard for them to wrap their heads around that, of really the hierarchy is just built on respect and not out of punishment or signing contracts or whatever. But yeah, so that's quite a diversion from your original question. But anyway, they are like, they're in these sort of this interesting space of like, they aren't in Starfleet yet, but they're being given a chance to prove themselves in this sort of like on the job training, almost like an internship or something.
Well, it gives you flexibility. The lack of rules and structure around that gives you a lot of leeway.
It does, but I think you also, like, it is a different scenario, right? You had, before, they literally had almost complete freedom with just essentially the gentle guidance of hologram Janeway, but otherwise they had a ship to fly around and make
right.
the big moves. And now they're actually in it. They're in the Federation. They're adjacent to Starfleet, and there are rules aboard starships that maybe they need to figure out.
How does Murph fit into that? Is Murph in Starfleet now, or in this kind of semi-Starfleet status?
Well, I mean, I there's only so much I can say, but I mean, they say at the end of season 1 that Murph is one of the ones that
right. They count like the 4 of you,
yes,
or whatever the number was.
Yeah, exactly. So Murph is included in that. All I can say to that is, I think when it comes to the intellectual capacity of Murph, I don't think. I think we're blazing new ground, I guess, as far as like what melanoid slime worms are capable of, and I think when you look at the grand scope of Star Trek, they have a long history of sort of playing with when creatures are sapient or when creatures are mature. You know, the Okampa like are fully realized, like effectively adults after 1 year. You know, so like we don't know what the life cycle of a melanoid slime worm is, and even if they, you know, can't communicate verbally, you know, that doesn't make them any different than a Temerian, for instance. You know, it's just a slightly, they're just more evolved and more intellectually complex that the universal translators can't understand them.
Maybe after a couple years, like if you go visit the home planet, and you know, 5-year-olds sound like Peter Ustinov. You know, so
yeah, who knows? I guess is what, like you know, don't impose your anthropocentric assumptions onto melanoid slime worms. Let's put it that way.
I'm gonna get that on a T-shirt.
don't put your anthropocentric assumptions onto melanoid slime worms. That's some good Trek movie merch you could sell.
and well, so going back to the finale, so Gwyn flew off on her own. That they all watched her kind of leave on a little ship.
Yes, at the end of season 1, you see she is off to go to Solum, you know, at her request to try to sort of fulfill her father's wishes, but also more just like the greater conundrum that her father was wrestling with, which is sooner or later someone's going to make contact with Solum, and if they're not eased into it the right way, it will spell doom for their society. You know, and so she, for better or for worse, she is the only one who is equipped with enough knowledge of what's happening, but also her own culture that she might be able to, you know, guide them away from self-destruction. And so that's what her mission is. How she'll do that, and if she'll succeed, or how easy it will be or difficult it will be, is stuff you'll have to wait and see.
I don't know if you can tell us this or not, but was she alone on that ship, or did she have some people with her?
I don't think she was flying that that ship. You know, I think Janeway says at the end of season 1, you know, Starfleet has offered to escort her, or to give her passage. So yeah, I think that Starfleet is going to take her to a certain point, and then that, you know, then it's all on her.
So it does give you this kind of the dual storylines now, where I guess we kind of had that with the Dauntless and the Protostar storylines in the back 10.
Yeah.
So
and, you know, I think any good television show, it's tricky to do in 30 minutes, but it can be done, you know, of the A story and the B story, and then they entwine together in interesting and surprising ways. And, you know, we're I think the Hagemans have already said elsewhere, we're not just going to ignore Gwyn. Yeah, it's just not. We're not going to write her off the show and then have her occasionally, you know, send a postcard. Like, you know, the story of Solum is so integral, I think, to these first 40 episodes that we'd be remiss to ignore that. And Gwyn is such a compelling character and so interwoven into the very fabric of Prodigy that, you know, of course we're going to follow her.
And Essentia is still a character too. I think that's been
confirmed. Essentia escaped successfully, so she's still out there somewhere.
Or what's her real name again?
Jamila Jamil?
No,
her code name is the Vindicator.
Right. They all get great names like that, like the Eradicator from Kids in the Hall.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been rewatching season 1, and I'm amazed at how much you guys pack into each episode without it doesn't feel like it's being packed in and rushed, but so much happens within the characters and the story in such a short time. It blows my mind. I don't have a question. I just think that's amazing.
And I think I've mentioned this before, just trying to squeeze what is traditionally an hour-long sort of story format into 22 minutes is not easy. And especially since we don't have the luxury of kind of putting just a joke band-aid on it, the way that, for instance, Lower Decks can kind of move things along just by having somebody lampshade something, or whereas we're trying to, in some cases we do that, but in other cases we are trying to just treat it with just pure sincerity and to let those moments breathe and to let those moments really sing. Sometimes you have to take narrative shortcuts or what have you, just to try to all right, yeah, we could spend another two observation room scenes talking about what they're going to do, or we could just mention it and get into it. So it's tricky, and sometimes I think we're more successful than others, but on the whole, people seem to be swept up in it. And the most common thing I get is I want more, which, I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah.
The structure of the show, it's serialized, but it's still standalone. But you ended up having a few two-parters. Sometimes you would call something a two-parter, but sometimes there were episodes that felt like two-parters, little arcs, like when they go visit a planet and you do, so is the mix still roughly the same of that kind of structure? Are you getting into more of the mini arcs, that kind of thing?
I think it really, when it comes to how many two-parters you have and how many you don't, it really does. It's not a mathematical equation per se. You have to kind of let the story tell you. You don't want something to feel too rushed, or it's not going to be impactful and it'll be unsatisfying. So sometimes when we're planning out, things, we might initially vision something as one episode, and then it's oh, actually, to really tell this story properly, it should be a two-parter, and there's an obvious break, and so that's typically how we kind of dictate these things. It comes down to, okay, what's happening in this 5-episode mini arc, first of all, where do we know they need to get to? And then we might have initial plans to say they'll do all this in this episode and then this episode. And then we're actually getting into the nitty gritty. You're oh, actually, there's too much that needs to happen here. So is there a way we can restructure and make them both feel like satisfying kind of episodes, but obviously so connected that they do kind of inform each other, and I think there are other Star Trek shows that have done that as well. I think Deep Space Nine certainly started in a place that was a little bit more episodic. And then, of course, by the end, it was I think the finale, you could argue, has something like an 11-part finale of the show. We don't go that far, but we certainly, I think, because we have a number of stories that we want to service adequately, I think there is a continuity that is very present in this one. That's kind of the fun of a streaming show, is that you can, once they're all out, you can just watch them all in one go if you want.
I forget how many credits you have as a writer, but there's 2 specific episodes I know are kind of your episodes, and they're the nerdiest of each block of 10, and very standalone in a way. So is this almost a thing for you now? Do you get the, Aaron gets to nerd out standalone every 10 episodes?
I mean, I don't know if it's planned out that way, but oftentimes there have been a few occasions where we'll get an episode that is very, what I like to say is crunchy, where it's there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of things that you have to have very intimate knowledge of this, that, or the other. And, in order for it to work, you just need somebody who just kind of has a lot of that internalized. And, it just so happens there are certainly other people in the Prodigy room that have that sort of, at least in terms of the inner workings of Starfleet and Star Trek in general, have that knowledge, but they had already committed to other episodes. And, a lot of the episodes that I wound up getting pulled onto were a little bit more meta, or they took, because they had so many layers to them, it was almost like a tiramisu cake. And I happened to be very intrigued and good at, kind of taking those things that could easily be way too much and really kind of shaping them into something. And so it so happens that works out that way. I do get to write a few more episodes that maybe aren't quite so meta this upcoming season. So look forward to seeing just, I don't know, playing it straight Aaron versus just super nerd Aaron.
I like super nerd Aaron too.
Yeah, you get trust me, there's still plenty of nerdy stuff in my episodes, but.
And was there anything in fan reactions to season 1 once it all ended that surprised you, like people latching onto something you didn't expect?
I mean, maybe not surprised, but there were a couple. I remember when the first 10 episodes came out, I remember we had this sort of like bet with the Hagemans about whether people would, how much people would be asking about the Cation child and like the little cats that was left behind on Tars Lamora. And I'm like, and the room was like, they are going to immediately want her to just join the crew and fly off and go on adventures. And they were like, we'll see. And yeah, even the Hagemans, I think, will admit that they maybe underestimated the love of the Cation child. And the other thing that surprised me, I would say, is the embrace of so-called goth Janeway. I don't think anybody anticipated that. Just like of the sort of dark when Janeway was somewhat corrupted by the Vaunacott virus. Or no, sorry, no, by the programming, not the virus itself. That came later. But was rebooted by Dreadnought to be a little bit more, helpful. I don't think any of us were anticipating that level of popularity, but who doesn't love a good variant, right?
I saw you sharing an image of a fan doing cosplay from your Enterprisian episode.
Yes.
Does it what does it feel like for you to see that? And when you're in the room, do you guys ever like talk about cosplay and fan reaction to things you're creating?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly talk about cosplay and how, this has definitely got to be a cosplay, but we, I think when it comes down to when you're trying to put together a good story, you do always want to think forward of like, how would the audience react to this? Are they going to be excited by this? Is this sort of answering a question they didn't even know they had? And I feel like if you can at least get a yes, probably to that, then you're probably writing a good story, in my opinion, especially when you're dealing with an IP that, there's a certain smell test that you have to pass in order for people to buy into whether this is what they want from, a major franchise. So we're always kind of thinking of like as ostensibly a show that will bring in young audiences too, like what would make, I have no shame in saying I would buy this toy when I was a kid, for a vehicle or what have you. And that's in the industry, in the animation industry, they call that being toyetic, which that's something you always have to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But no, like I love conventions, and my dream for a long time was to see characters that I helped put together or expand or even create as worthy of being cosplay. So whenever I see that happen on any of the shows I work on, but especially this one, it delights me to no end.
I have a kind of topical question, and this is something that I'm maybe the only person obsessed with, but it's come up recently, and it kind of relates to something you did in season 1 in the first 10 when you brought in all the classic characters using recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Now that the technology is evolving, could you imagine doing it with AI? And just writing a script for Spock.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even put Spock in because of your timeline, Spock is still out there. Like, and not just Spock, but you could do all sorts of characters.
Yeah.
Or do you think that's wrong in some kind of way?
The AI of it all, from a purely like Star Trekian cool new tech way is interesting, but I do think that from a purely philosophical standpoint, I don't know if it totally makes sense from just sort of like a progressive utopia for us to be focusing so hard on trying to get robots to replace the things we enjoy instead of the work that that we don't want to do. Does that make sense? Should
Well, but in
I
this
feel
case, it would be for someone who's passed away, for example, or someone who can't do it anymore. Like Star Wars, James Earl Jones is happy for the Star Wars people to just have AI recreate his voice.
Yeah, and I guess if it's kosher with the actor, then that's a different story. But I kind of have come back around to where it's a strange place to be, I think, as an artist or as an actor, because I don't know, there's been so many times where a role has been recast and it's brilliant, and that's sort of even going back to the roots of acting, of who plays Othello, who plays Lear on, and that sort of tradition, getting kind of thrown out, I guess, just so that robots can recreate the perfect verisimilitude. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be that way. I think Ethan Peck is doing a phenomenal job, as Spock, putting his own spin on the character, but also, it feels like Spock. It doesn't feel strange to me. So I've kind of come around to, I used to think whatever the art requires, but I think if it comes down to not utilizing the original performances, but just generating new ones through an algorithm, I don't know. I think my personal preference is I'd like to see actors actually bringing something to the performance, because there is something unique about versus the words on the page versus what they can infuse it with, the subtext, the inflections that may not be there, the ideas of inhabiting this character, and they might bring something that you didn't think about. It's the same reason why I prefer to work with a writer's room versus just being alone in a cave with my laptop working on my Star Trek manifesto. Inevitably that collaboration is going to bring something that I never even considered, and for the better, and the more you kind of whittle it down to just, this kind of verisimilitude, and you're kind of shrinking your sandbox in a way of surprising new things. Because I guarantee you there are things that Shatner and Nimoy and Forrest Kelly brought to those characters that were not on the page. And if you just had a robot kind of, reading those lines as written, I don't even know if Star Trek would still exist today, because I think that they brought a certain gravitas to it and surprising turns to how it was made that brought them to life. I don't know if computers will ever quite get there. Is that a crazy answer, or does that make sense?
That's a great answer.
It's a great answer. I mean, I think on the technical side, you can start with the real performance if you choose, of an actor, and have it then be audio the equivalent of video deepfake. There's an audio deepfake, but you would start with the real performance.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can just recast. I mean, the new video game Star Trek Resurgence has recast. There's a guy playing Spock, and he does a great job.
That's Piotr Michaels, I should say. He's I've actually worked with him before. He's a phenomenal voiceover actor. I worked with him on Tales of Arcadia. He used to be on Mad TV. He's a master impressionist. And Star Trek Resurgence is a great example, because, even when I was listening to Piotr's performance, there were little cracks and little tweaks. I was like, wow, he got that. That was in the Nimoy performance. And then he also was able to add a little bit of his own tweak to it. So, I think I like working with humans, I guess is my answer.
That works.
Yeah, glad to hear it. Should we move into our Star Trek questionnaire?
Yes.
So, do you have an episode or movie you think is very underrated in the Star Trek world?
So, I have a few things. I can just kind of mention them, and maybe if one intrigues you, we can talk about it. A couple of them are actually from Star Trek Voyager. Voyager, So there's, I feel like season 1 of Star Trek Voyager, a lot of people it took a little bit of time to find its footing, but after rewatching it a few times, obviously for Prodigy, I was like, oh, that was actually a really interesting episode. One that I don't think many people talk about at all is an episode called Emanations, I think it was.
Yes.
Where,
that's a great episode.
Yeah, but I don't hear anybody really discuss it, where it's like, how interesting that you have, Janeway, who is sort of like this, at the very least agnostic sort of science-minded person who is then confronted with this planet where they seem to have a gateway to the afterlife, and and have a whole sort of society built around that and funereal customs, and then she has to sort of question her own faith in science, and is there a different way to acquire knowledge? And it's just like, it goes to some really deep, surprising places and then leaves it sort of open-ended in a way that's actually quite interesting to me. So some other episodes I think are underrated. Another Voyager episode I personally love is Concerning Flight. I don't know if you guys, you remember that episode.
Yep.
It's so, it goes to such lengths to just have Janeway and holographic Leonardo da Vinci get on a hang glider, but it's so amazing and I love it. Because maybe it's just because I love John Rhys Davies, and I've worked with him before as well, and he's such a character. And I will never not love holographic historical figures. It's so fun, and Da Vinci was so masterfully played by him. Ekaterina, I love it.
It's funny because I just remember Jerry Taylor saying that she got a lot of flack for that. For doing so much with him that women were mad at her or something.
Were they? Maybe I just missed all of that controversy, because
I didn't get it either, frankly. I thought it was a great character, and it made sense that was, she would pick someone extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's just, I think I guess maybe there is some. It's a little strange to see a captain, taking on a role as an apprentice, but it's an apprentice to Da Vinci.
Yeah.
That's I don't know. I just like Leonardo da Vinci, and I liked seeing them running up a hill and getting on a hang glider to fly away. And him stealing the mobile emitter from the Doctor was pretty amazing. And then another episode that I feel like for whatever reason is very divisive, and I don't totally know why, is 1159. I think that episode, I think that's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
The Millennium episode.
Yeah, where they have the
Millennium Gate.
The Millennium Gate. And I think what I liked about it is it felt like a departure from a standard Star Trek episode, but in a great way, insofar as it almost felt like, remember that old Spielberg show Amazing Stories, where you would have these sort of slice of life things, and then there'd be sort of a magical realist element kind of peppered into it. How often do you get just this really deep personal tale of someone sort of coming to terms with their future, and then literally have that being reminisced about by your future ancestor, 300 years from now? I always thought that was kind of an interesting take that I don't totally get why people were maligning it, other than they just felt like it was a filler episode or something. But I thought it was quite sweet just seeing her fall in love with this little bookkeeper and help him understand that there's more to the future. And, even the small things versus the big things can have great effect on people's trajectory and the trajectory of your ancestors. I also liked it because they showed, Indiana, where I'm from, central Indiana. So it felt very real to me that, because the bookstore is very much based on a bookstore that's in Bloomington, Indiana, where I, grew up going to. So I'll just name a couple other ones and we can move on. TNG, The Chase, I think is a really fun episode. And what a mystery, we found something encoded in the shared DNA of all of Alpha Quadrant species, and there's actually a message physically encoded in it. It's like an Indiana Jones movie set in the 24th century.
I mean, I always looked at that episode of why does everyone we meet just have stuff on their forehead, right? And that's the episode that kind of tries to explain that.
Yeah, it's a pan-galactic transpermia or whatever, and actually saying like, yeah, we actually do all share, a guided evolution, and that's why. It was like, oh, that's awesome. And then, and I always kind of loved how at the end, all these, you had the Romulans and the Klingons, were the Cardassians there too? I can't remember. But it was just like they were all there, and then some of them thought it was like a weapon, and then they find out just this message from the progenitors, and they're like, "Oh, let us never talk of this again." But yeah, I think there's plenty of room there to see where that goes. I love that episode. Schisms, another great episode. I felt like that was like nightmare inducing, like truly scary.
I love that one.
Yeah.
It's a huge favorite of mine.
Right. Obviously the paranoia over alien abductions kind of reached a fever pitch in like the 80s and 90s. And they're doing their own take on that on a show where people encounter aliens all the time was really fascinating. And then I'd be remiss if I don't bring up my favorite episode, Time's Arrow. I love it so much. I know I know some people have mixed feelings about Mark Twain in that, but he's my favorite. He's just that sort of tin whistle sort of, and they bring him on the Enterprise. Come on, it's so good.
You have such this encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek, and I know that people in the writers' room vary. And if something ever comes up, a riff on a given episode, but not everyone knows it, like, do you guys all like stop and watch it? Do you pitch the episode to everyone to say, okay, well, it's got Mark Twain in it? How does that work?
Yeah, usually just for expediency, one of us will just pitch what happens in the episode. But there have been occasions where we have paused and say, like over lunch, we're talking about a certain aspect of Janeway's character, or for instance, we have the ensign security officer who winds up saving Janeway or releasing her from prison. And as we were talking about doing that episode, I think we had discussed the episode before as being one of Kate Mulgrew's favorite episodes that she played, and then we wound up watching that episode over lunch and said, you know what, I think actually the Bernari, it could work because there's a great parallel to just like doing good recklessly without expecting it to come back to you, and then eventually it does in the most unexpected ways. And so, yeah, we definitely would watch episodes over lunch. I remember when we first started, we watched a few episodes of the animated series just to kind of see what, get everybody up to speed of what had been done in animated before. And the second episode of that is the episode where Spock's dog dies, and it's just like so brutal. We're like, wow, we can do that. Sure. Let's do that, but with a hologram. Yeah, so definitely we loved watching clips or whole episodes over lunch if we could. And then I've already spent too much time on this episode, but I love some DS9 episodes I really love that I feel like people should talk more about. Duet, phenomenal episode. I think it's like season 1 or 2 that people usually say, oh, it gets really good season 3 onward, but I'm like, Duet is like the first inkling of what that show was capable of. I love Vic Fontaine. Another thing where I feel like people were surprised. I was surprised that people had divided feelings on him. I think he seems like it. He's just a hologram that wants to help people and run his nightclub. You got to love Vic Fontaine. So are you of the I don't like Vic Fontaine camp?
I'm not a huge fan.
Okay.
I felt like he was used too much.
Fair enough.
That they overdid it, basically.
Yeah, that's fair. But who doesn't want to see people up on stage singing like old big band songs? It's so fun. And then Little Green Men is just a delight. I love that episode. Maybe that's not underrated, but that was my quote unquote short list.
What is your most contrarian Star Trek opinion? Like the one I always give to people is that I thought Chakotay and Seven were a good couple.
How interesting. I guess this is another one where like I just kind of felt this way, and then I was surprised that other people didn't was I think Genesis is actually a good episode of Star Trek. And here's why.
Oh,
Because I think, how often do you get to do a body horror episode, first of all, on Star Trek? I guess there's a few, but, it's the fact that they worked it into like a ticking clock that everyone on the ship is going to turn into like animal mutants if you don't figure this out in time. And then also the explanation that it wasn't some alien virus coming in, but it was actually a retrovirus they accidentally created in the lab that was activating their junk DNA. And then Picard has to figure it out with Data before he turns into a lemur. Like, that's cool stuff. I love it.
we rewatched that as a group during the pandemic, the TrekMovie team.
Yeah.
And there are so many little things in that episode that make it so great. Just the posture as the actors are imitating the animals that they're supposed to be. And that was, Gates directed that one, and she talked to us about it too. You're right. That's a great episode. It's one of those ones you think was dopey when you remember it, and then you watch it and go, no, it's terrific.
I remember it scared the bejesus out of me as a kid, but then I couldn't stop thinking about it. Yeah, like there was the who is it? Barclay had like some weird spider, and then there was like this great horror like Jaws moment where you're like, oh no, Worf has reverted to one of his Klingon ancestors, and he may have eaten an ensign, and it's like, holy crap, like it's scary. It's like The Thing.
Worf definitely ate a couple crew people.
Yeah. Yeah, I encourage fans that maybe had a lukewarm reception to it to rewatch it. I think it's actually done really well. And I believe it won an Emmy for like Makeup Bite, if I recall. Yeah.
It was definitely nominated.
It was at least nominated.
So the next question is, what is the nerdiest Star Trek thing you've ever done?
The nerdiest Star Trek thing I've ever done. I do own Star Trek uniforms, so I guess that's a line that is crossed. And then I definitely tried to bid too much money to try to win a destroyed bird of prey off of one of the prop site auctions that was used in TNG and DS9. But then I was outbid like tenfold, so. I got it. It was an attempt to spend too much money that I should probably spend on my upcoming baby to instead own it wasn't even a complete bird of prey. It was like a broken one. It was like one they had blown up. So it would have just sat on my shelf like pieces of plastic that Dan Curry had probably pieced together out of junk or something. And I'm like, yes, I need to own that. And then probably the weirdest or funniest or nerdiest item I own is a Star Trek trading card for the Traveler. And I also have one for Livingston, Picard's pet fish.
Nice. All right, here's another one. What position would you have if you were serving on a starship?
I'd like to think that I would be in engineering. Since I found that some of my favorite characters are engineers. They're sort of like surly, like, all right, well, I guess I got to just find a way to make this work kind of people. Sometimes in a writer's room, I feel like you're an engineer just trying to take the bits and parts of what you have and construct something incredible out of it. But in honesty, I would probably wind up in the lower decks, maybe science track or apprenticing to the cook that showed up in the finale of Star Trek Picard. I feel like I could handle that.
Is there a particular ship you'd prefer to be on?
Gosh, I don't know. I'd be happy to be on any of them. I probably wouldn't want to be on DS9 just because it was like a war zone. Maybe now, but maybe it's just a tourist destination now. But I feel like I would totally be on on Voyager. That seems like a pretty chill one. After it came back from the Delta Quadrant, they probably would just be like, let's just go explore. Enterprise was would be fun because they had all those like topiary gardens and, they have people doing yoga. It's like a cruise ship.
I'm curious in the writer's room, you have a preference for engineering characters. I know each script eventually gets assigned to one person, but are certain people looked to write or punch up certain characters in the writer's room that they have a better feel for? Or is that just, does everyone share?
You know, it's actually pretty egalitarian. You know, everybody gets like sort of like their take or their first pass on their script, and then it kind of goes to the head writers, and then they'll do a pass on it, and then well they'll give notes, and then they'll do their pass on it, and then it'll come back to the writers' room, and all of us together will do a table read, and read the scripts together, and after we'll read a scene or we'll send it out for people to read it in advance, and we'll read it together, read a scene, pause, say, did anybody have any thoughts, any punch-up jokes, anything that bumped them or and whatnot? And that I found that's a model that, you know, the Hagemans and myself and Chad Quant, we brought over from Tales of Arcadia, that we just kind of figured out ad hoc. And it seems to work pretty well, so that, you know, everybody kind of has a say, and then also the writers themselves who are writing the script have a chance to weigh in at all stages of the process and make sure that, you know, everything sounds right, all the characters sound right. You know, there certainly are some people that are like, they're better at writing dramatic scenes, or there's some people that are like better at writing, you know, comedy, and so oftentimes they'll kind of gravitate towards that sort of stuff. But you know, it's very much all hands on lower decks in there.
What is your biggest burning Star Trek question? I mean, we saw you tweet something recently about, you know, pips and rank on Voyager with the Maquis, but I don't know if that's your biggest one or if you have something bigger that you just never quite grasped.
I think my biggest burning question, first of all, like, what's going on with the Q continuum? You know, because I think last we saw, they were ripping each other apart with a civil war that ostensibly was going to be solved with Q's son, but then we never really kind of got to see it again. Felt like we were just starting to get a chance to see what their world is like on Voyager, and then the closest we got was Q kind of showing up, but he was on kind of a personal journey. So I want to know what's going on with the Q continuum. I love the Q. I think they're amazing. They're Star Trek's own Mr. Mixie Pixlick, you know. And then the other thing that really I'm like, when are we going to come back to that is what happened to the sword and clone of Kahless? You know, like I think the clone of Kahless was sort of like offhandedly mentioned in like an episode or two of Deep Space Nine. Is like, oh yeah, he's still kind of like the, you know, the figurehead, but he has no power. and then the sword of Kahless, I think they just like threw out an airlock or something. So ostensibly it's just floating in space somewhere. I love space archaeology. I guess I'm like part Picard that way.
You, now that, you know, you are a creator of Star Trek canon, so you now have this opportunity to say, you know what, I would like to fill in this little hole, as it were. Is that something you guys talk about?
Oh, sure. You know, I think the real balancing act on Prodigy is like, how can we not have it feel what they say in the world of screenwriting as feeling sweaty, where you're working really hard to just squeeze in. What about that sort of Kahless? You know, like, because especially on a show like Prodigy, you know, it is first and foremost these young people's journey, and so it needs to have some bearing on their sort of trek through Starfleet, and the greater story that you're telling for that season. But that isn't to say that Star Trek isn't masterful at finding ways to have little side quests and adventures, you know, while fighting the Dominion War, or, you know, while dealing with the Romulans or whatever. So, you know, I think that I think that I certainly have like a master list. I have a notes document that is like way too long at this point, that like whenever we have a blue sky period, I'll be like, here's some cool stuff I've been curious about that might apply to what we're talking about for this season. And then, you know, we collectively figure out what's interesting. And sometimes it comes up organically too, where somebody might bring in a concept for an episode, and then I'll be like, or someone in the room will be like, oh, that's just like, that sounds similar to this unanswered question from Star Trek, and maybe this is a chance for us to expand on that. So it's really fun, actually, to have all these toys in the sandbox that you can pick up, that, you know, it's like finding an action figure that was buried in the sand from somebody who graduated 10 years ago, you know?
I'm dying to see that list that you have.
Maybe when it's not proprietary anymore.
Right.
Are there any particular fan theories that, and this could be a Prodigy fan theory, or just in general, any Star Trek fan theory that you've always thought was fun.
I mean, there are definitely Prodigy fan theories that I thought were really fun, but I'll hold on to those because they may just make it into the show. But I do have some favorite fan theories about Star Trek in general. My favorite is probably that Nick Locarno, it was actually Tom Paris. But he used a pseudonym in order to prevent, special treatment from his relationship to his dad, Admiral Paris. And didn't want to be treated differently. And I'm sure there's stuff that doesn't totally line up with that, but who knows? Maybe it was all a ruse, Then, of course, there is like the finale of Star Trek Enterprise was a holodeck simulation that was manipulated by Section 31, and Trip actually survived and became a spy for Starfleet. I think there's even like a book that says as much. And I'm like, that's not the worst way to retcon that, because it was all a holodeck simulation, so interesting idea there. And then one more, which is the craziest thing I've ever heard, but I can't stop thinking about it, which is that talking about Livingston, the fish, he had a secret compartment that he could access through a series of water tubes that led into the cetacean ops section of the Enterprise D that we never met, that we never saw, and he could hang out there with the dolphins and relay orders on behalf of Picard.
Oh, I love that.
I love that one.
So he was like a super smart fish.
Yeah, and I'm sure they found some way to communicate with fish, a couple hundred years from now. But it's my favorite, and that was like partially the explanation of why Livingston never appeared again after Jellicoe ordered him to be gone. He just was reassigned to cetacean ops.
What did you feel about the theory we put out there that it's all Zero's fault, bringing back the Borg?
I think I've said this elsewhere. Like, I don't want to just be like word of God, say, yes, that was it, or no, that wasn't, because, there's always that wiggle room for canon that, who knows, there might be a great writer down the line that wants to expand on that. But I love that there is a plausible possibility that, that Zero and our crew had partially set in motion, some of the events that rippled down to what we saw of the remnants of the Borg in Picard seasons 1 and I guess 2 and 3, because that's my favorite part of Star Trek, is when they can sort of dovetail these little background stories together where there is a continuity there, even if it's not explicitly stated. So the one thing I do want to say is, like, I think saying it's all Zero's fault does kind of, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, because if the events of season 1 effectively prevented the destruction of the universe or the galaxy at the hands of the machine gods. So I think that in a way, if they were involved, it kind of helped unfold the process of season 1 to save the galaxy, if anything.
Fair enough.
I just want to say there is evidence for your Nick Locarno theory.
Is there?
Because there is an episode where Admiral Paris has a photo of Tom on his desk, and it's Nick Locarno. It's the photo from the TNG episode.
There you have it. It's not a conspiracy theory.
There's proof.
So I don't know if you are a shipper, but are there any two characters that you always wanted to see get together?
I'm not sure about like always wanted to see them get together, but I think they're definitely, I'm in the minority in that I think Worf's relationships were actually kind of sweet. I wasn't like, I didn't hate Worf and Troy together. I also thought Worf and Jadzia had nice, I guess I just want Worf to find love, really. Maybe those should have been my answers to the controversial opinion.
Have you had any Star Trek crushes?
Yeah, I'd say growing up, that would be Kira Nerys from DS9. What can I say? I had a crush on her.
Where do
choice.
you come down on the should Janeway and Chakotay have hooked up side? Because there's a lot of shippers there.
So many.
Yeah, I mean, I personally try to say just agnostic to but then also just see what is actually there in the show. And I think I think there was chemistry between them. Like there's whole episodes where you can at least see that Chakotay is carrying a torch for Janeway, and I don't think I'm overstating that. And there was an intimacy there, as far as like how far you go with that. And that's really a question for what you see, in the show, in the shows now and in the future. And that kind of relationship certainly was very interesting. And I know they sort of dropped it at a certain point in Voyager. And I thought that was, but if you watch Voyager beginning to end, the first 3 seasons, they very much are kind of leaning towards there being a certain chemistry between them, that I don't think it's outrageous to say that Chakotay certainly had some sort of feelings, even if it was unrequited for Janeway. But I don't know if it was totally unrequited. I think it was more just like the nature of their chain of command prevented it from playing out. So it just remained a forever what if question that I think is tantalized, the fandom of just like what could have been. And, it is interesting and something we certainly don't ignore, I should say, in Prodigy. So, obviously Chakotay is coming back as a character, and the nature of that relationship, we don't shy away from it, shall we say.
All right, so here's our last one. So what part of Star Trek canon do you find the hardest to swallow? Like, just as an example, like nobody uses money in the Federation, but we still have waiters.
You're right. I think sometimes maybe it's just seeing all the difficulties that we face in today's society. Sometimes it can be hard to share Gene Roddenberry's belief that human nature can change on a fundamental level. That greed will completely disappear in a post-scarcity society and such. Just maybe it's just because we do kind of live in an age where we have automated things that we're supposed to, if you look at articles from like, the 1920s that are like robots will be invented and we'll only have to work 2 days a week and then we can just have leisure time. And instead it was used to make it so that we're even more efficient and have to work 5 days a week even harder. And so sometimes I think it can be a little hard to believe that people won't take advantage of the system and everybody will just kind of be out there for each other. But I also choose to believe that it's possible if we collectively want it to be. I think there are things that culturally, we can kind of improve upon, and I do believe that humans can fundamentally be better than their forefathers. And so, I think that's something that it can sometimes be hard to see the forest in the trees, but we also can't give up. As far as the humanity at large, choosing to be their better selves. I also have a hard time believing that food from a replicator would taste great. I think that it does seem like, like when you eat like a frozen dinner and very clearly the chicken nugget has been reformed into a chicken shape, from whatever meat paste was left over in the machine. It feels like that's what a replicator would be. But maybe that's just my 21st century thinking.
It's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah. I think that's it. Maybe before we go, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about Prodigy.
If there's anything that I want to say about Prodigy before we close out, I mean, I guess Nickelodeon is going to start airing episodes 11 through 20 here in America. So if you don't have Paramount Plus, that might be a chance for you and your young cadets to catch up on the rest of season 1. and that'll be happening sometime soon. To keep your eyes peeled for that. And then season 2 is coming this winter. So yeah, stay tuned. It's going to be a really fun adventure, and I would say it's probably the most even more ambitious in its storytelling scope than season 1 is, and it goes to some far out places and then really brings it home. So I hope everybody tunes in. Some very surprising places that it goes, and can't wait to share it with you all.
Well, we couldn't be happier to have you. You're one of our favorite guests, so thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Take care, gang. Nice talking with you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Well, that was pretty amazing that he spent so much time with us. And as he said, I could just talk Trek forever, and so could we. So we could have, had we all had time, we probably could have gone on for another hour.
He came prepared. We told him what we were planning on doing, this kind of questionnaire thing, which is an experiment. So hopefully, readers, you could come to the site and let us know, did you like that? Should we do that again with anyone else? I'm not sure anyone else would endure that. Terry probably would.
Mike McMahon would too.
Yeah. Tawny Newsom
would. I was
would.
just going to say Tawny would. There are a whole bunch that definitely would. And then some that would just be sort of lost. But it was fun to do. It's something I saw Neil Shirley had done in his newsletter, and I really enjoyed it. So it seemed like a good way to go. But let's wrap things up, since, boy, have we all been talking for a long time. Let's wrap things up with our bits of the week. Tony.
I just want to point to an upcoming book written by my friend, Jeff Bond, who's a contributor to the site. He's written a bunch of books, and his latest book he's got coming up is called The Jerry Goldsmith Companion. It's this huge 2-volume set. You can pre-order it on Kickstarter. We did an exclusive excerpt this week, and if you are a fan of Star Trek music or film music, he is one of the greatest film composers of all time, and Jeff's the guy to chronicle his life and his work. So,
yeah, Jeff's definitely the expert on this, so that's the right guy to do it.
What is your bit of the week?
Mine is just so goofy, but Todd Stashwick has this cool sort of game den in his house, and so he decided to invite some friends over to play D&D, and they've posted a lot of pictures. So it was Jerry Ryan, Mika Burton, Terry Metalis, 2 of the writers, Matt Okamura and Christopher Monfett from Picard, and Sylvina Knight, a makeup artist, and they're all playing D&D in Todd's game room, and they look like they're having so much fun. There are pictures, there's video. Jerry Ryan's facial expressions are awesome as she's trying to figure out what the hell she's gotten herself into. So, we'll put up links to their feeds, but it's basically it's not even a specific tweet, it's multiple shots and videos that are just a whole lot of fun to look at.
What's funny is I used to play D&D when I was a little kid, and I haven't for decades, but maybe I should do it again. It's cool again, right?
Well, I don't know if it's cool again, but my 19-year-old played for many, many years. And in fact, when he was about 14, we went and interviewed Connor Trenier, and I had Nat do the interview, and Connor Trenier was trying to figure out what was nerdier, D&D or Star Trek. And Connor decided D&D was much nerdier.
Then the nerdiest thing is the Star Trek role-playing game, because there is a Star Trek version. It's not Dungeons & Dragons, but it's essentially Dungeons & Dragons with Star Trek. So that's the ultimate.
Yeah. Feels like something we should all do in Vegas.
We should consider it. You'd have to read, there's books. You have to, there's a lot of rules. These are complicated games. It's not like Monopoly,
Yeah, that's not as fun. Anyway, on that nerdy note, that's it for this week.
See ya.